Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Social Media Tools, Listening and Engaging. Just a couple of things before I hand this over to Ellery. First of all, this webinar is probably about 40 minutes long. I know it said it was about 30, but we have so much information, I think it might be just a little bit longer than that. At the end, we will do Q&A. So if you think of some questions along the way, go ahead and add those to the window that you see there, your GoToWebinar window. There's a box you can type your questions into, and we will answer as many of those as we can at the end of the webinar. One of the questions we get every time we do a webinar is this being recorded? And the answer is yes, it is being recorded. We will have this available on our help site in about 2 weeks. So once the webinar is over, we will get that up there in about 2 weeks. So with that, I am going to hand this over to Ellery.
Thanks, Jill. So thank you for joining us today for Social Media Tools. This is the second tool-focused webinar that I've conducted here for Vertical Response, and it's primarily because of demand. We constantly get questions that are specifically asking, okay, I get the strategy, I get what you're suggesting we do, but how and what tools can I use to do that? So that's going to be the focus of the webinar today. And as far as agenda goes, I'm crafting it around those questions that we get asked all the time. So these are kind of the 4 key points that I'm going to hit. First off, the why behind it all. Why would you bother trying to add one more tool to all the various things that you need to keep track of in your marketing efforts? So we're going to go over just some reasonings and some of the advantages of using third-party tools outside of just logging on to the social networks that you're using. We're also going to look at the specific tools that you can use to listen and engage. Engagement is the golden word when it comes to social media. You hear it thrown around a lot, but what exactly does that mean, and are there tools to make it easier to engage with your audience? Then we're going to look at the metrics question. How can you track your success using tools? This is another one that we get a lot is, what metrics are important? And that's question 4 there. What specifically should you be measuring? But then what tools are out there, both free or otherwise, that can help me do this? So without further ado, we'll jump right in because as Jill said, we have a lot to cover, and I want to make sure that we do have time for questions. So why do you need social media tools? Well, if social media were just Facebook, which sometimes it feels like it is, but if social media were just Facebook, you probably wouldn't need a tool, right? You just log on, take care of a status update, reply to any comments on your wall, etc. But as we all know, social media is not just Facebook. It's Twitter, it's LinkedIn, it's blogs. It goes on and on and on. And really, keeping track of it all becomes a full-time job within itself. Some companies like Vertical Response are lucky enough to have someone like me who can spend a full day every day working on social media, but most of our customers, and I'm assuming most of the people on this call, do not have that luxury. So the idea is how can you, bring all this into 1 or 2 places to really focus your efforts? So, put simply, the reason that use and utilize social media tools is to keep your head on straight. There's some specific advantages of social tools that we're going to cover, and then I'm going to go into some specific tools that I use and would recommend you checking out as well. And kind of as we go through the course of the webinar here, I'm going to spend a little more time on these kind of slides where we look at, points and reasons and how-tos, and less time on the tools because, and I'll say this as an introduction to the rest, as we do go into the specific tools, there's a ton of tools out there for social media. I'm just going to be able to go through a few today. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on them because all of these are websites that you can go visit, create an account for free, and really decide what's going to work best for you and your working style. But to get started here, let's look at some of the key advantages of why I would recommend bringing some tools into your social marketing efforts. For one, and it goes back to the last slide, you probably have accounts on 2, 3, or even more social networks. So social tools are going to allow you to bring those accounts together, post across those networks simultaneously, and manage multiple accounts across multiple networks at the same time. I do put this note in here to always double check before sending, and that's simply to avoid one of the major pitfalls of putting a lot of social profiles into one place, particularly if you keep personal profiles and business profiles on the same dashboard. You want to make sure that what you're posting to your business account, for example, is something that was intended to be going to that business account. There's horror stories about this, and really there's no reason why it should affect you if you just make it a point to double check. But some of these things that we'll look at, some of these tools, I feel like I'm saying tools so many times here. I'm looking for
Well, it's
other
in the
words.
title, so I think it's okay.
So some of these tools are actually going to allow you to put permission-based things on there so that you can't make this mistake, that you have to click through a couple of screens to give permission to post that out to whichever network you're indicating you should. And similarly, you can attach these permissions to having multiple authors. So you hear a lot, don't let the intern deal with your social media marketing. And this is exactly why, because at the end of the day, if something is broadcast across your social networks, you want ownership and accountability for that to be in the hands of the person that you trust most. That said, interns are good for social media. They get it. They can go and cull a lot of content, things like that. So using a tool like Hootsuite or Tweetdeck or some of the others that we'll go into allow you to give certain amounts of permissions to those people who might be trying to go and find content for you, but that you don't necessarily want to be the final word on what gets posted. Tools allow you to set up searches for your brand. So various names for your brand. For example, for vertical response, we do vertical response as one word, but more often than not, our customers and other people talking about our brand put a space in between the words vertical and response. So I can set up a search for vertical response one word, vertical response two words, VR for small biz, any other terms that people might be referring to our brand. But I can also search for things about the industry and our competition. I can look at email marketing terms. I can have as many searches set up and which is there's nothing more helpful when trying to keep an ear to the ground as far as what's happening in your industry and what kind of conversation is happening around your brand and other brands that you might be interested in. Social tools also allow you to schedule tweets. I say tweets there, schedule posts, I should say. Facebook posts, LinkedIn posts, even posts to your blog, YouTube, across any social network that you might be part of that you could even think up. There is a tool that will support scheduling tweets to them, which really helps if you're a busy business owner and you don't have all day to be tweeting in real time or posting to your various networks in real time. Using some of the tools that we're going to go over allow you to spend some time in the morning, or hey, even on a Sunday night you can schedule your tweets for the entire week. These are all things you have to be careful about. I am a big proponent of participating in real time as much as possible, because that is how social networks really are nurtured best. But when it comes to just sharing content or promotions you might be doing, there's no reason you can't schedule that ahead of time. And finally, organizing and grouping your contacts. So as you grow a social presence, particularly on a network like Twitter, where you're following people and they're following you back, you might grow it into a thousands upon thousands of people you're following, which doesn't make sense from an organization standpoint. So using various tools to organize your contacts will help you see the messaging from certain contacts you want when you want it. And this real-time alerts and notifications, it's kind of the overarching theme of social media, is that social media happens in real time, so you need to be aware of what's going on as that happens. And then finally, the big elephant in the room, ROI, return on investment. It's, the thing that people talk about all the time with social, and I will say that it is possible to measure, but very, very difficult without using social media tools. So those are my reasons. That's my pitch to why you should listen to the rest of this webinar. So let's dive into some specific tools. First off, tools for listening and engaging. We'll follow this by looking at tools specifically for measuring and how you can really track your success. The first tool that I want to recommend is a social media dashboard. I say Hootsuite, Tweetdeck, etc., because those two are by no means the only ones. There's a ton of them, and they're all pretty similar. This picture that we're looking at here is Hootsuite. That's what I use for the corporate vertical response accounts, but I use Tweetdeck for personal use, so I wouldn't say that I'm a fan of one more than the other. They each have their benefits and their shortcomings, but overall, they all do the same thing, which is allow you to add multiple accounts across multiple social networks. So, and which ones they support vary, but only a little bit here and there. But for example, you could have 3 or 4 different Twitter accounts. You could have 2 different Facebook pages you manage, a Foursquare account, a LinkedIn account, you name it. And you can separate them into tabs, which you see across the top, as well as enter different feeds that you want to be looking at, organized by your different accounts or brands. So what we have here is an example of my dashboard for vertical response. So on the left, you'll see we have mentions. Anybody who mentions the brand by using VR for Small Biz, the exact Twitter handle that we have. And you'll see on the right side the various search terms I mentioned earlier, vertical response spelled in different ways. Another nice feature of this, which I mentioned on the advantages of social tools, is having some sort of accountability and way to track multiple owners. So you'll notice there's a note on the upper left here that this particular tweet I responded to, and it tagged it so that when other account holders hop into their Hootsuite, they'll see that I already dealt with that and that they don't need to. Buffer is a great tool that's getting a lot of buzz lately that allows you to do exactly what I was suggesting earlier, which is schedule tweets throughout the week. And I should say Hootsuite, TweetDeck, CodeTweet, all those other ones allow you to schedule too. What Buffer does that's pretty cool is you just set times that you want tweets to go out, and then you fill up a queue with as many tweets as you want. So essentially, we all spend time reading blogs, reading industry websites, and we think, oh, this is something I'd like to share with my network. What Buffer allows you to do, and there's a plugin you can see up here on the top, this is the Safari plugin. As I'm reading a blog post, I can just add that post to my buffer. And by doing that, essentially I've got an entire kind of, backlog of good content that can be leaked out throughout the day, throughout the week, to give me a constant stream of presence on Twitter. Because more likely than not, you've got an hour of the day set aside that you're doing your news and blog reading, but you don't want to overwhelm your Twitter network with posting all that content in that same hour. So using a tool like Buffer is a great way to collect the great content that you're reading and meet it out over a specified period of time. When it comes to listening, Social Mention is a great free tool that's out there. So you can set up alerts based on your brand name, and it's going to crawl blogs, Twitter, bookmarking sites, comments on different blogs. It's going to crawl across the web, very similar to how Google Alerts works, but very specific to the social space. And you'll also get some nice metric-related things like sentiment and reach that is attached to that messaging. And so this is kind of a 2-for-1 measurement platform. You're both getting listening and engagement tools as well as metric tools here. Again, free to use and pretty easy to get set up. After creating an account, you just put in the terms you need, and you're getting emails or email alerts, or or you can just keep the dashboard open and watch it happen in real time. I mentioned Google Alerts, and it is still a very powerful tool for social monitoring. So again, you set up whatever terms you want, whether they're your own brand's terms or competitor terms, and then set up how often you want to be notified. This is something that our PR manager, Connie, uses for her day-to-day monitoring, and can be a really easy, simple thing for any small business to use to monitor mentions of them across the web. So now that you've got a grip on how to engage and share your content across your social networks and listen to the buzz, good or bad, that might be happening, how do you start putting together some metrics? What tools are there out there for measuring and tracking your online social efforts? Well, Facebook Insights is hands down the best tool for Facebook. So great, I dedicated 2 slides to it.
Ooh.
But one thing that makes it great is it's free. But the other thing is it's built right into your Facebook, and it's built by Facebook. Most of these other tools that we look at are all third party, so they are at the mercy of whatever information the social networks themselves want to share. And that's always going to be the case with a third-party app. Facebook, built by Facebook, or Facebook Insights, built by Facebook, is going to give you more insight into your Facebook platform than any other third-party tool is. So I always point to this as the first tool you should be using with Facebook. And it's something everyone kind of wants to use a third-party, like, oh, if it's specific to just measuring, it must be better. It's not the case with Facebook. Facebook Insights is super powerful and continues to get better. But just a couple things that you can pull from Facebook. This is just the high-level shot here. Things like likes, monthly users, post likes, and feedback. All really good information when it comes to both your reach, your awareness, as well as the engagement you're getting. What kind of posts are getting the most engagement? So that's the next shot we have here, is what Facebook considers feedback. That's likes, comments, and unsubscribes that you might be able to attach to certain posts. But what you can do is look at the specific posts you've got and see what's getting the most feedback. And what that can do is really help you craft your Facebook activity based on what your audience is most engaging with. Where they're getting reactions. Is it industry articles? Is it pictures of the office? I mean, what we always joke here, but it's not really a laughing matter. We get the most engagement, bar none, when we post pictures of Dwight, the office dog.
Well, and I would say just things going on in the office in general, because looking here, the one that had 4,000 impressions was a picture of Alf in the moving crate.
Right. So
it's kind of internal pictures and Dwight seem to have really high engagement.
Yeah, and could sum that up, I guess, by saying behind the scenes. So
yeah, behind the scenes.
On Twitter, people really react more on our accounts with good how-tos and industry news and that kind of stuff. When it comes to Facebook, seems to be more of a personal relationship, which is those behind-the-scenes kind of lifting the curtain posts. So that's the kind of insights that we took away from measuring this kind of stuff. Outside of Facebook specifically, Hootsuite also has some really nice free analytics that have to do with clicks. So if you're using the built-in Owly link shortener service that Hootsuite has, you can get really good views into what's getting the most traction, what's getting the most clicks. So definitely check that out, and you'll see it if you have a Hootsuite account on the left side. You'll see analytics, both quick and custom, and you can also create Google Analytic reports, Facebook Insight reports. Those aren't free, and I think that Google Analytics and Facebook Insights do a much better job presenting their data than Hootsuite does. But for clicks on Twitter using the Owly links, Hootsuite's analytics are great. If you're not using Hootsuite, if you're using Tweetdeck, and so I mentioned some of the differences, that they each have their advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages of Hootsuite is that built-in analytics that we just looked at. TweetDeck does not have those, but TweetDeck does support Bitly. So if you're using TweetDeck to send out your tweets, and you're using the Bitly link shortener, which is built into TweetDeck, you can just go on to Bitly on the web and check all of the stats for any Bitly links that you put out, and they will show you where that traffic's coming from, who else was sharing the same links, how many clicks those links had. And kind of cool, if you're using QR codes, they'll actually generate a QR code for
That's
a
really cool.
specific link. So, if you're at a trade show or something and you want to link people back to your sign-up form or any other web property that your company has, you can use Bitly to create a QR code that the event attendee would just scan and be taken right to wherever you've directed them.
If you're wondering what a QR code is, it's that square in the top right-hand corner with the little squiggly things in it.
And we have a post on our blog about how to use them if you're curious.
Yep.
Another Twitter-specific tool that I get a lot of use out of is Twitter Counter. So this will actually give you counts of mentions, retweets, and followers, all kind of key metrics for Twitter as far as deciding how much engagement and how much reach you're getting. So this is a quick little shot of that. It's free to use at a light version. It's not free to get the full package of analytics, but it's pretty inexpensive, less than $20 a month, I would say off the top of my head. Social Report is kind of like Twitter Counter for multiple accounts. So Social Report allows you to add Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as your Google Analytics accounts, Meetup, and a couple other networks that you may use. And what's nice, and there's actually some listening tools here, but what I really like is that it's all on one dashboard, free to use, and kind of starts to give you some ideas about what the stats mean, as well as what you might be able to do to get some of those statistics up. So definitely worth checking out if you either aren't getting what you need from other services out there, or if you just want to try and bring it in all under one roof. Social Report's not as robust as some of the individual ones that I just went over, but as far as getting everything into one dashboard, it is the best in my opinion out there. And Google Analytics, people don't really think of it as social all the time. I'm sure you're using it for your business and other aspects, but it is a really good social measurement when it comes to looking at traffic. So Google Analytics will tell you where your traffic is coming from, if it's coming from Twitter, if it's coming from your blog, if it's coming from Facebook, LinkedIn, or anything else. And this is a great awareness measurement. And so that said, we'll look into, you hear me saying awareness, you hear me saying engagement. So what metrics specifically matter when it comes to social media? And I will tell you that kilowatt hours do not matter when it comes to social media. But there are things that do, and before we look at, my recommendations, this just came out this morning from Bezo Strategic Marketing. Literally this morning as I went through my blog feed and was reading stuff, I saw this great chart and I said, wow, how perfect is this for the webinar I'm giving at 1 p.m. today. It's always nice to get an idea of what other people are looking at so that you can kind of have a baseline for what might be important to you. So you'll see the biggest metric here is followers. So fans on Facebook, followers on Twitter, whatever that is. And my guess is that the reason most people are measuring that is because it is the easiest thing to measure by far. All you do is log into your account, see how many followers you have. But what's encouraging as a social media marketer is that the second thing there is actions taken. Because as a marketer, that is the most important thing, right, is your conversion. It doesn't have to be a financial conversion, a purchase on your website. It can be signing up for a webinar. It could be, signing up for an event. It could just be giving an email address to you as lead generation tool. But that is the holy grail, is getting the customer to take some sort of action. And it's something that I think people have been afraid or thought that they couldn't measure when it comes to social media. So the fact that that's something that's being measured is encouraging, and hopefully we'll see that grow. And as we go down, page views, clicks, leads, these are all great examples of things you can measure. But what should you measure specifically? Well, I'm not going to tell you that. That is based on a business by business level, and different metrics are going to measure or going to matter to different businesses. But there is, some key kind of points along the funnel, if you will, that there are metrics out there that point to it. So awareness, influence, engagement, and actions are all good examples of that. And under each of those, you'll see some examples of what might be a good indicator of one thing or another. So with awareness and reach, it has to do with, traffic to your various sites, how many likes you're getting on your page, how many followers you have. And reach is really about how many followers your followers have too. So things that when you get something retweeted, you can look at who's retweeting it and see how many people might have seen it on there. And some of the tools that we looked at earlier are going to give you an idea of that reach based on retweets that are happening and clicks that are happening. When it comes to influence, this has to do with how many people are pointing back to your social properties, whether it's your blog or your Twitter, the contents that's being shared. And I wouldn't by any means call this a measure all, but there are sites out there like Clout and Peer Index that aggregate a lot of information about your brand and your social presence and attach influence scores to them. So, I wouldn't live or die by those measurements, but it is kind of a good insight into where you stand. Engagement, though, and action are really the things that I think you should be looking at the most. And so engagement's going to be counted in things like mentions, comments on your blog or on your Facebook status updates, retweets, views on YouTube if you've got a YouTube channel, clicks like we were looking at on those hourly reports on Hootsuite. Those are all good indicators of how much people are engaging with your content. And finally, the action piece that we just spoke about. Your store visits, whether they're, if you have a web store or just a blog that you're driving people to, purchases, registrations, action can be defined in a lot of ways. It has to do with really what you're looking to get your customer to do. So as far as, though, a overall idea of a strategy for measuring your success, first off, be realistic. Nothing happens overnight when it comes to social. If you really want to start getting serious about measuring your social impact, I'd say give it a minimum of 6 months of tracking before you really start judging yourself. And, don't be too hard on yourself. Ignore irrelevant metrics. There are a lot of metrics out there, hundreds in fact. They probably aren't going to matter to you. Too much is worse than too little. Find the 5 to 10, or even less if it works, a number of metrics that make the most sense for you and focus on those. Set a baseline from day one and stick with it. Again, it has to do with the be realistic and that this stuff takes time. You're never going to be able to get any actionable insights out of your measurement if you don't stick with it and stick with that same set of metrics for a minimum period of time. Share your measurements and your insights often and widely. There's a lot of people in the company that are going to find interest here. And so there's no better way to get support for your efforts in social than by sharing it and being transparent and open about what's going on across your social networks. And finally, I just wanted to make this point. We've been talking about measurements, we've been talking about tools, but especially when it comes to making sense of social for people who aren't involved in it on a day-to-day basis, qualitative, anecdotal observations relate better than any count of retweets or anything else you can be giving. So to say, hey, we had a customer tweet a horrible thing about us the other day, we reached out to them, and 10 minutes later they were tweeting good things and said, thank you so much for the help. That's going to make way more of a difference to, the executives in your company who can really understand the, usefulness of that kind of interaction far more than other kinds of metrics. So remember that qualitative measurements work too.